Hey everybody, my name is Hannah. I'm one of the curriculum coordinators here at Eagle Bluff, and today we are going to go on an edibles and ephemerals hike. So ephemerals being things that are just short-lived during the spring season, so we'll see some things that we can eat and some things that we're just going to observe until they disappear in a few weeks. So a few things to consider before we go on our hike is where are we actually foraging? So today at Eagle Bluff, we are able to pick anything that we want because we've got a nice land share and opportunity here. So if you're interested in doing some of the things you see today, you're welcome to come back. And just for a frame of reference, this is where we are starting, and you can find that on our map located on our website. If you're going to forage somewhere else, there's a few things to consider. Most state lands in Minnesota, you can only remove the fruiting body of plants. So that would be either a fungus or that could be a berry. So if you want to dig things or take plant parts, you have to be really careful where you're going to forage for those items. Most places have all the information you need online, but you can also call and ask. If you're going on private land, then again, make sure you ask those landowners, or if it's your own land, then you have no problem. As we're foraging today, we're going to practice sustainable foraging, which means that we're not going to pick everything from one spot. We might pick a few plants and then move 5 or 10 feet, and we're only going to pick things that are in surplus and bulk quantities. Again, we might pick some things that we're only going to take the top off and leave the roots in. Some things we'll completely dig up. So you'll see as we go throughout the program what we're going to do. Now, once you've got a nice place to go forage, the next thing you're going to need to do is bring some tools with you. So when I first started foraging, I pretty much just had a pocket knife and Ziploc bags. But as you get a little bit more used to what you're looking for in foraging, you'll get some tools that are really helpful. So things that I like to bring with me is a hori-hori knife, or any sort of kind of spade and cutting tool. So this knife has some serrated edges that's really nice for cutting things off, as well as a really nice tool blade to dig down and get through some of those roots and tubers. It's also really nice in the field to actually clean up some of those things before you bring them back with you. Another good tool to have is just a pruners. Any kind works. It makes it really quick to just snip something right off. Again, a little handheld tool would work really well for that, just any kind of knife. A few of the things we're foraging today, you're going to want to wear gloves for because they're either little stinging or they're going to have some sort of reaction to them. So strongly suggest you bring some sort of gloves that are going to protect you from that. And the last thing that you want to bring with you is something to carry it in. So you could bring plastic bags, you can bring a basket, cloth bags, whatever works for you. If you are foraging for mushrooms, it's strongly suggested you use a cloth bag so when you walk around, the spores can release inside of the bag. And when you take them out and you're ready to prepare, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So now that you've got all your tools that you're ready, we're gonna head out for our first forage, and we're gonna first talk about some invasive species that we get to munch on. Is that we are in salad season. So what that means to me when I forage is I'm looking for where that food energy is. So right now that means things are into the green leaves and the shoots coming up. And then into summer you're looking for your berries, and then into fall and winter you can start collecting some of your roots and your rhizomes. They vary a little bit throughout the season, but today we're going to focus really on some of those leafy greens. So right here, what we're surrounded by. Yeah, Hannah, what's up?
What's a rhizome?
Ooh, a rhizome is just like an underground root, a tuber, and those stay through the winter usually and so can shoot things back up into the spring.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. So what we're surrounded by right now is some garlic mustard, and it is starting to seed too. So you've got some right here that are putting up their little seeds, and then you've got some over here that haven't quite shot that up yet. Now, garlic mustard is an invasive species in Minnesota, so it's really awesome that we can eat it. The problem is that as soon as these seeds come out and you pick the plant, or even if you don't pick the plant, it spreads those seeds everywhere, and as you can see, even though we burned this section, it spreads pretty quickly. So garlic mustard is a really great leafy green full of antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, anything that you really want to get out of. Think of spinach, you're going to be able to get out of garlic mustard. One of the most popular things people do with it is make a pesto. Today we're going to use it in some fritters, and we'll see what else we can use for it. So when picking garlic mustard, a few things to consider. The entire plant you'd be able to pick up and pull out from the ground. There's a bunch of little shoots coming out from one general area, but when you want to eat it, you're really just going to focus on eating those leaves. Anytime you pick garlic mustard, if you want to be the most sustainable, bring a black garbage bag with you and throw all of that garlic mustard in the black garbage bag, because that's going to kill it. Now, even if we pull up this whole plant and we just take the greens off, so you've got that tuber out there, I broke it. Even if I take that off and we take most of the greens, it still could seed after this. So again, if you're gonna pick this and wanna be a champion for the environment, find a way to basically pack it in some dark bags and make sure that it doesn't come back. But for our purposes today, what we're gonna harvest is just these little green leaves.
Question.
Yeah, Alex?
Why dark bags instead of like a regular white plastic bag?
Probably doesn't matter too much, but the dark one helps heat it up and basically kill it.
Oh.
Yeah, so any sort of garbage bag, anything to make sure that this is sealed up tight and not gonna get out anywhere. So what you really want is just that leaf part. You can get a little bit of stem in there. It's not gonna hurt you. But generally, one way that I like to do it is if there aren't little grassy pieces in here mixed like that, I usually just take the top leafy parts, twist them off, and I'll put that right in one of my bags. And then later we're gonna wash this. We're gonna take out any of the extra stems that we don't want. It's best if you can right now, do as much cleaning and getting rid of the things that you don't want in the field. And then later we'll make this into some tasty things.
So then with your roots and things,
Yep.
you're gonna put the roots and things in a plastic bag?
Yep, so the rest of this, whatever we've pulled up, we're gonna want to, I mean, you can take these with you if you want out of the field, if you've got somewhere that you're collecting them.
Cool.
But let's say here at Eagle Bluff, these ones that are about to seed and even not to seed, we're gonna make sure that they are not gonna come back. So we're gonna put them in a bag and we're gonna just leave them to basically decompose in that bag. And eventually, throw them in the trash can. We don't want to put them in the compost because there could still be seeds in that compost and then they'll ruin your garden. So generally, garbage bag to trash can for garlic mustard.
Cool.
So another thing that's around us that you might see are these smaller leaf clusters around here. If you start looking at one, you're gonna see a lot of them surrounding us. And this is actually another plant that you're probably more familiar with as it gets to be an adult. A lot of people think this is wild rhubarb. It is not. This is burdock. So if you've ever had those brown burrs stuck to you or your pet as you're walking outside, this is its young plant. And you can eat the leaves, just like any other salad green. You either want to boil them first to kind of get them a little softer or saute them. But what most people use this burdock for is the root. And the root can be used just like any other root vegetable. And sometimes it can be dehydrated and used kind of as a flour substitute. I'm not going to dig it up today because it is a really, really long root and it can be pretty frustrating. A lot of people actually break half of it off as they're digging it up. But totally edible, and it's a bit of a noxious weed, so a lot of people don't like them in their yard. You might have some. Dig it up and eat it instead of just mowing over. So those are two weeds. Next we're going to go to some wild parsnip, another invasive species that we can eat. So the next weed that we're going to look to eat is called wild parsnip. And most people are familiar with this when it gets tall and has that yellow flower at top. And a lot of times you'll see them in roadside ditches. And they're actually a pretty noxious and invasive species. And the biggest problem with those is that they can cause phytophotodermatitis. And it's kind of like poison ivy, but instead you're gonna get blisters when that juice of the stems are exposed to sunlight and sweat. So what we're gonna look for today is either the first year of growth or the leaves down here on the ground. And whenever we're gonna use parsnip, we're actually gonna use the root. And just like normal parsnips, it's gonna look like a whitish carrot. Now when we're gonna harvest parsnip, like I said, if you break off those stems and get any of the juices on your skin and then the sun or sweat mixes with it, you're gonna start having blisters. So whenever I harvest something like this, I'm always gonna make sure that I have my gloves on. And then when we dig up the parsnip, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the leaves right here in the field, and then I don't have to deal with them as I take them out. So I'm gonna use my hori-hori knife for this, and I'm just gonna find some parsnip. It's hard to mistake once you can identify what it is. But as you can see, all these little green plants around here, these are all little bits of parsnip coming up. Now, you might notice that we're by the side of the trail here. Generally, you don't wanna harvest any green tops or your veggies, your greens, by the side of the trail. If you think about dogs walking and where they most often pee, or other animals, sometimes you don't know. When you're foraging too, make sure you're in an area that isn't using herbicides or any other chemical. Here at Eagle Bluff, the chances are that maybe an animal peed on it. But with parsnip, we're gonna go down to the roots. So for us, it doesn't matter. Where that garlic mustard, we wanted to get it kind of off the trail to pick that one. So first thing I'm gonna do is just try and find that cluster wherever it looks like there might be one stalk. So you might have to gather some leaves around. And this root could be, 3 to 6 inches depending. So once I've got that cluster kind of sectioned off there, I'm gonna start just digging a circle around it. That way I can make sure that I'm not cutting off the tuber at all. You might encounter that this grows in any kind of soil. So right now we're digging in a kind of a rocky-ish soil. That might make it hard to get the whole parsnip out. We'll do our best. Again, just digging around in a circle, trying not to get into any of those rocks that are down there. Once I feel like I've got it pretty well scoped out, all I'm gonna do is kind of dig it out. This one's really stuck in there. Once you get it, this one, see, I didn't get all the way to the bottom, so this one is actually a pretty big one. I'm gonna clean off all that dirt, and you can see, just like if you've ever gotten a parsnip at the grocery store, kind of looks like a carrot. So a few ways that you can get rid of those greens. You can just snap them right off if you want. If you've got a knife tool, you can go ahead and just cut it right off in the field. You've got your nice parsnip. Anything that you can clean off in the field, so any dirt, anything like that, is really nice to do right here before you add it to your bag. This one isn't too bad, and probably will just be easiest to clean with kind of a scrub brush and in the sink. So these we're gonna make just roasted parsnips, just as a side dish, kind of like roasted potatoes, any sort of root vegetable. Again, you wanna be really careful when you're digging up parsnip that you don't get any of the juices from the stems onto your hands. And that you are digging up an invasive species too, so feel really good when you're doing this because you get to eat the weeds. So we finished digging up some parsnips, and even though this is an invasive species that we don't want and a lot of the growth might still be under the ground, we really want to make it look like we have not been here. So just practicing general leave no trace methods. I like to just go ahead and cover back up. We'll pull some of that dirt back in there. You'll see later when we're doing some ginger that I'm going to put the leaf cover back over the area that we foraged from. So in general, just trying to make it look like you haven't been here or disturbed too much, especially on the side of the path here where it doesn't look too great as you're walking around. Now I'm not replanting anything, I'm just kind of filling in that hole, making it look a little bit more tidy.
Oh, would have never known someone foraged here.
Trail intersection number 1, again, if you want to look at any Eagle Bluff maps and kind of get an idea of where we are headed today. We just finished foraging some of our invasive species, and we're going to head down this trail to check out some spring beauty, some Virginia waterleaf, just some of those things that are short-lived during the season, just to kind of observe and see what's around. So follow me down the trail. As we spread into here, you're going to see this kind of greenish, purplish hue of these plants all over the ground. This is a water leaf. There's a lot of different types, Virginia water leaf being the most common. And it's really easy to ID because it'll have these little white spots on it that look like droplets of water. Now, Virginia water leaf is going to eventually, you can see it's kind of got a bud here. It's going to, or the leaf bud, it's going to send up flowers eventually. But if you really wanted to eat these, you can pick these leaves and use them just like any other salad green. So Virginia waterleaf is very plentiful. And like I said, really easy to ID once you've seen it once. So we'll keep going. Find some spring beauty. morning and the sun's not quite out. Some of our flowers have gone to sleep and they're not really ready to wake up, but there is a lot of spring beauty along this path. So mixed in with the Virginia waterleaf, we're gonna see these little pink buds right here. If we see some full open flowers, we'll definitely capture them later, but these will be small whitish pinkish flowers. They're gonna have dark pink striations in them, and their leaves are really small, just small little green shoots coming up. Now, spring beauty is what we're gonna call an ephemeral, so this is only gonna be around for a few weeks and then it's gonna disappear. You can harvest it, and I'll show you what it looks like. You really only want to harvest spring beauty in a survival situation and if there's a lot of it. There are some areas where it doesn't grow as prevalent. So in this area, I happen to know that it's all over this hillside right here. If you just sat here and started looking, you'd see all those tiny little buds, especially once the flowers open up. So what I'm actually going to show you once I dig the spring beauty up is what's called a corm. So similar to like a rhizome or a root, it's just the little part at the bottom of spring beauty. Now again, you can eat this corm, but it's kind of tedious to harvest, as you're about to see, and I just lost that one. It's really difficult to get the corm sometimes. It's maybe the size of your pinky fingernail, and sometimes people call them fairy potatoes. You can use them as a potato substitute. You can kind of boil them in some water for about 10 to 15 minutes. Some people like to use them in their pestos in lieu of the nuts. But again, once we get one, you'll see why you probably don't want to spend too much time out here harvesting them. Just have to be really gentle. They're a very fragile, delicate flower. Just gonna break away the dirt here, see if I can get to it. This is a really tiny one too. Sometimes they get even bigger than this. So this is a very small one. I just picked it off there, but that's the bottom of the spring beauty. So you clean it off,
It's very small.
take those rhizomes off, and you basically have a little potato spud.
It's tiny.
So again, not really worth, in my opinion, to forage for them, but in a survival situation and you needed something to eat, you could definitely munch on those.
You'd
But
need a lot of them.
yes, you would.
That'd be a lot of energy.
So mostly I enjoy spring beauty just for how beautiful they are. Again, since I'm not actually going to take these, I'm just going to put that corm back in, and I'm just going to pack that dirt back around and try my best.
Will it
to
grow?
make
Will it keep growing?
It hopefully should. I'm not sure. Sometimes it just depends on how much that spring beauty wants to survive into the next season.
That's beautiful.
So again, those are all over one of those ephemerals that'll be here for just a little while and will eventually disappear and you won't see in the woodlands anymore.
Well, and this is the water. What's it called?
Virginia waterleaf.
Virginia
or just
waterleaf.
any
Yeah,
water
there's a
leaf.
bunch. Yeah.
All
Could you
over
eat
there.
them as is?
Which ones?
For the Virginia waterleaf.
Yeah, I mean, most of them aren't salad greens. Obviously, you want to wash
Okay.
them off. There are some greens that you really have to cook, so do your research. In general, you never want to eat anything out in the field like this that you're not sure in ID.
Right.
Things that you can smell usually, like garlic mustard, if you're not sure what that is, you can take a leaf, roll it between your fingers, and smell it, and you should be able to smell that garlicky smell.
I can.
That's a
got
great
some
way.
in my bag, and I
Yep.
can smell it from here.
Yep, and sometimes when you walk
Garlicky.
around and you carry it, you can smell those things around too. So smell's a great way to help identify. But again, if you're not sure what something is, or you're not sure if it should be eaten raw, do your research and find out before you ingest it, because everyone reacts to things a lot different as well.
That's the moral of the story.
We found some wild mint here. There was a lot along the trail as we were coming down, but again, I kind of want to get off the trail to avoid any animals or humans being around it. This is just wild mint. It's got this kind of purplish hue. It's a little fuzzy. The best way to ID it, in my opinion, is to pick a leaf and smell it. And this is a very strong mint. So what you want to do with it is kind of up to you. You could make a mint syrup. You could put it in mojitos. You can dry them and use them as a seasoning. It's pretty versatile, and they are pretty plentiful once you see them. So to harvest them, I just start picking the little leaves. Again, I might pick 2 leaves off of a plant, and then I might go to a different plant and pick another 2, and then I'll just kind of work my way around, depending on how plentiful they are, making sure that I'm leaving plenty of plant in the ground. I'll get up, I'll look around, and I'll see that there's some more over here, so maybe I'll just pick a couple leaves. Just being as sustainable as possible when you're picking a plant, rather than picking the fruiting body of something like a berry. So we're not seeing anything specific right here, but just kind of a good place to mention where to look for things that are growing right now. So always looking on the sunniest part of the slope. So if you take a kind of a glance over at our ravine area here, this area next to us is where most of that sun is hitting, and it's lush and green. But if you look across the ravine and the other direction, it's still very much just covered in that leaf litter. So most of the things that you're going to find, especially in this spring season, are going to be on where that sun is hitting the most. So think about that when you're out and about, especially if you're not at Eagle Bluff. Where is all of that sun going? That's where you're going to find all of the green stuff.
Calm river.
It's a calm, calm river.
It's
and
calm,
we're looking
calm
for some
river.
edibles.
Edibles to munchables.
Yum,
Munchables are
yum,
tractable.
It's
Tractables
calm,
are delectable.
river.
Delectable
We're
because
looking
they're
for some
edible.
things to eat.
Hey, we are on the Power Plant Trail, so we've got the Root River next to us, and we've got our sunny slope over here. So we stopped here to look at something called Dutchman's Breeches, and you'll see why they're named that in just a second. It's kind of got this carrot-looking top, parsley-looking top. But while we're not going to eat this, it's a really fun spring ephemeral. So if we get a little bit closer to the flowers that they're putting out, you'll see why they get the name Dutchman's Breeches. Kind of looks like a little pair of underwear. Most commonly, people might have bleeding hearts in their garden, and this is kind of a relative of that plant. So, well, again, we're not going to eat any Dutchman's Breeches today. It's really fun once you start to see these leaves come up and to wait for these beautiful white flowers to kind of appear as well after. We are kind of on our power plant trail because up behind me is the former Root River Power and Electric Plant. And the reason we're down here is because I happen to know that there are a lot of nettles down here. And whether that's stinging nettle or wood nettle, most people are familiar when they're walking in the woods and they brush against this, and then they feel that scratchy feeling for about 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes longer depending. And that's because nettles have these little barbs on them that sting essentially. But what most people don't know is when they're young like this, the leaves, just like garlic mustard and spinach, are full of antioxidants and vitamins and minerals. And these are a favored thing of most foragers in the spring season. So a few things to think about before you're picking your nettle leaves is one, probably going to want to have some gloves because they do sting. There are ways to harvest them without gloves, but I just like to be safe and not deal with that little bit of pain. When you're picking the nettle leaves, usually I like to just pick them right off the stem and not get too much of that fibrous material. But if you look at this leaf, you can see the little barbs on the stem. And if you flip it over, you can kind of start to see a little bit of the barbs. They're still young, so they're not as bad, but they definitely will hurt you. So when you cook and prepare nettles, usually you need to blanch them to get rid of that sting or really aggressively wash them in cold water. So today we're gonna do two things with the nettles. We're gonna make nettle chips, kind of like kale chips, and the oven temperature in that heat will actually take off those barbs. And then we're gonna use them in some fritters too. So before we do that, we'll give them a good blanch in the water for about a minute. So when you harvest these, just like anything else, you see there are a lot of them here, but I'm just going to pick a couple leaves per plant and then move on to that next plant. Well, nettles are not necessarily invasive. They are kind of bothersome for some people. So you are still going to want to sustainably harvest them so that we're not being too much of an impact on our land. So we're just going to go ahead and pick some of these while we're here, and then we'll make our way up the hill to check out some of the other ephemerals that grow on the hillsides during the season. We get a lot of ephemerals in one little location like this, and we haven't even spotlighted some of them, but we've got one here is our wild ramp, and we'll go harvest those in a little bit. I got another place. As you see, there's only one, so I'm not going to pick this one. Leeks or wild ramps. Then we've got wild ginger coming up with this soft heart-shaped leaf. Again, I've got another spot where they're more prominent that we'll harvest, and they do have a nice red flower that'll be coming out soon. We have our Dutchman's Breeches that we talked about already. And then we have our hepatica, which is one of, right here, one of the first things to come up in the spring. So hepatica is kind of goofy. What you'll see first, and these are already starting to go away, are a purple leaf coming up, so sharp-lobed or smooth-lobed. And then after this purple leaf that overwinters, the first thing that it'll actually send up is its flower. After those flowers are done is when it'll start to send out the green leaves that stay there for most of the year until they turn purple in the fall. So we've got some of our flowers some of our leaves, as you can see right up here, some of our new green leaves from hepatica coming up. So those will stay green for a while, getting all that food energy, and then they'll eventually turn to that purple color. Got more of our bellwort here that we talked about. So here is again that kind of, these shoots are a lot bigger and thicker. So these would be better to harvest than those ones that we saw a little bit more. So wild oats or bellwort. And then something else that we haven't seen yet is bloodroot. And this is this plant right here that's kind of wrapped around its little flower. When it's cold, this leaf, which is kind of kidney shaped, will wrap itself around its flower to keep itself warm. This is not an edible plant, but it is a medicinal one. A lot of Native American cultures used it for a variety of different things. And I'm gonna dig it up just to show you how it got its name, and then I'm just gonna put it right back in the ground because we don't need it today. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of dig it away. This is really soft soil, so I don't really need to do a whole lot. And once we start getting in there, you're gonna see this root stem right here. And you're gonna see that red color coming out. I'm actually gonna leave it in the ground because it's actually a pretty nice root connected to its next little friend. But if you clean it off or if you scratch it, you're gonna see that it starts to ooze that kind of reddish blood color. So that's how it gets that name, bloodroot.
Bloodroot.
Yep. Again, not eatable or anything, so I'm gonna go ahead and pack that back in, let it continue to grow, and put out its nice, beautiful white flower. So one of the most prized things that people look for in this spring ephemeral edible season are wild ramps or leeks. There's also wild onions. We don't have any here at Eagle Bluff, but we do have a lot of these wild ramps. Really hard to mistake them as anything else. And this is another great one where if you're not quite sure, you can always rip off the leaf, just like garlic mustard, rub it in your hands and give it a smell, and it'll be very oniony. So these are kind of a combination between garlic and onions. Now, because people like these so much, they tend to get over foraged. So we're gonna go over a couple different techniques to forage them. Again, this is another one where you're gonna wanna look for a bigger grouping of them, harvest a few from this spot, and then hike over and look for another big grouping of them. So first thing is just identifying them. They've got these nice big broad glossy leaves. They're really, really smooth to touch. Remove away some of the leaf litter. You'll see that they start to have a reddish stem going down to their rootstock. A lot of times there'll be several different leaves, usually one, maybe three sometimes, coming out of the same stalk. The most sustainable way to forage these is just to take your pruners and to just cut right off and leave everything else in the ground. And that way that root stem is still in there. And these are really great dehydrated. You can use them kind of like you would chives. We're gonna use them in our fritters and in some Irish soda bread today, just kind of give it a seasoning. Now I'm gonna leave that one there and put my leaves to the side. The other thing is you can actually dig up the entire bulb, and this is what a lot of people are looking for. So when I do this, again, I'm gonna find a cluster. A couple of these are really close together, so I'm probably gonna end up digging 2 of these at once. These are much easier to dig up than parsnips, but I'm gonna put my knife all the way in the ground and just kind of move the earth a little bit until you get that pop. And then what you see once you clean it off is you've got your bulb, just like you might see on an onion, and then you've got your little rootstock stems. So what I like to do is I'm actually gonna cut off the rootstock here, and I'm gonna put that back in the ground, hoping that it'll go ahead and reseed and keep itself nice and sustained. So if you want that whole bulb, that's a great way to do it. You also have to prepare them anyways. You have to cut those rootstocks off once you get inside. So to me, it just makes more sense to do it right here. The last thing I'm gonna do out in the field is I'm just gonna clean it up. There is a little papery sheath on here. You just pull that all the way off, and then you've got your nice clean ramp or leek, whatever you wanna call them.
Beautiful.
Similar to VeggieTales when they say there's a leak in the boat. Sometimes that's a joke that you get to hear when you're harvesting your ramps. So I'm just going to put all the debris, the roots and everything back into the ground there. See how I left this one here, but there were 2 others. So again, just making sure that I'm not foraging everything around. Just going to scatter those leaves back around. And in this area, I might harvest a few more from this area over here, maybe 1 to 2, maybe 1 over here, and then I'll probably move on. I really want to encourage these plants to keep spreading, especially since they are so delicious and so easy to identify of our spring for edibles and ephemerals. So let's harvest some ramps. So we have stumbled upon a really large area of wild ginger, which is one of my personal favorite things to harvest. It does come with a little disclaimer. If you eat too much of this wild ginger, it does have some things in it that could cause some usually internal disruption, but that's why we just eat things in small doses. It is a very easy thing to forage and really hard to mistake. So like we saw a little earlier with that heart-shaped leaf and that red flower, first thing that are going to come up if you check down on the forest floor here are mostly just those soft heart-shaped leaves. Really hard to mistake for anything else, and they're also really fuzzy. So their stems are fuzzy and the leaves are fuzzy. Now to dig these up, we're going to actually go for the root or the rhizome that's actually really visible. So if we clear away some of these leaves, so we can see these leaves are, the leaves of the ginger are pretty hardy, so they're not going to just flop over if you do this. And what we're looking for is kind of that connecting root between some of these flowers. So you've got kind of the leaf here and you see that root coming down, or like right here you've seen a root going down in the ground, and they really will just connect underground to each other. So in terms of harvesting, again, this is another one. Harvest a little bit here and then go ahead to another spot, but generally you're not going to get all of it, so it is going to stay in the ground pretty easily. So what I'll do is I'll just take my knife or whatever you have with you, pocket knife works fine, just kind of tease it under the ground to break up some of those tendrils. It is a very tedious thing to clean later, so the most you can do out in the field the better. So usually you'll end up with a piece this long. Sometimes when you're first learning you cut it off a lot smaller. So again, kind of kidney shaped leaf, fuzzy stem. So what I'm going to do out here to just kind of prep it is I'm just going to go ahead and cut off this part, this top part here with the leaf. I'm just going to put it back in the ground. It may reroot, it may not. And then what I'm going to try and do is clean off as much as I can out here in the field, which is why it's really nice to have this knife that can easily take those tendrils off. Because once you get back inside, you're going to have to either peel it off or scrub all this dirt off of it as much as you can. So as much as you can do out here to prep it, which is just really easy to do. Now, you can do a lot of different things with ginger. What I easily do though is I just candy it. So just like your candy and anything else, you're boiling it in a sugar-based water, and then you also get a ginger syrup out of it as well when you do that, used in cocktails or whatever you really want to do. You could also dehydrate these and then grind them or crush them up and use them as just ginger seasoning. So there's a lot to do with this ginger. If you break it or eat it like in the field, it's going to be a lot more peppery or more bitter than regular ginger. So just keep that in mind. It's similar, but not quite exactly the same flavor profile. So when I'm harvesting these, I do a couple in a row. I'm only going to do this one for right now because I've got some already. And just keep pulling them up, put those plants back, and then you can move on to another section. And you can just see these larger roots that once you start seeing them, it's just going to be really obvious where all of those roots are connecting all of your plants. And the more girth you've got on those, sometimes the tastier they are. Now with ginger, this isn't just an ephemeral. You might be able to actually harvest these most of the year. So if we think about, like I was saying, where is that food energy going right now in the spring, it's mostly going to the leaves and then to the flowers, and eventually the roots. So sometimes ginger can taste a little bit different throughout the year depending on when you're harvesting them. But right now is a great time because they're easy to see as they're coming up. Just like everything else, once I'm done harvesting, I'm just going to go ahead and spread the leaves back over, make it look like we weren't here, leaving any trace. We got our ginger. Another awesome ephemeral is called Trout Lily, and we actually in this area of Minnesota also have dwarf trout lily, which is an endangered species. So it's really awesome to see this over here. If you look out just in this one section, and you'll start to see these purplish green leaves that are speckled. And that's what you'll see first coming up. These are actually pretty well grown. These all look like full-size trout lily. But what they'll actually do after the leaves come up is they'll start to send out their little flowers, and they're just starting to come out. I don't think I've seen them bloomed yet. They'll kind of like bellwort, they'll just hang open. They'll have white, sometimes they're yellow flowers, and the petals just kind of tip up. So it has been said that you can eat the leaves. And if you're walking around in the woodlands and you start seeing one, you'll probably see a really dense mat just like this. They come up all in really big clusters and groups. So again, that's trout lily. So we are at some of people's least favorite things, and some people that know how to use them, they really enjoy dandelions. Now, these are only a weed if you consider them to be a weed, just like any other plant in your lawn. A lot of people try and get rid of them using chemicals and all sorts of things, but consider eating them instead. You can eat every single part of the dandelion. So first, when they're coming up, you've got these little green leaves. Now, these ones are pretty tiny, but you can use those as any sort of lettuce replacement. When they're coming up and they've given out their flower blossom, these can have a lot of different uses. One of them, that's really tasty in my opinion, is dipping them in batter and deep frying them. And so it's a little veggie fritter. And then the other thing you can do is you can dig up the dandelion roots for a lot of different purposes, but my favorite is you can kind of dry them and turn them into a coffee substitute. If you're going to dig up the roots, you kind of want to look for areas like this where there are a lot of connected ones, because then you can get that bigger, deeper, bigger root. So next time you're looking at dandelions, try not to think of them as just weeds, but try and think of them as a food source that have a lot of different potentials. And if you're not sure, this is another great one just to kind of look up online and see a bunch of different recipes that people have made. So dandelions, excellent eating.
So the coffee thing?
Yeah.
Does it have like the same amount of caffeine as coffee?
It's not a coffee thing. It's kind of like chicory coffee. So there's not really like caffeine in it. It just gets that name because it's a type of basically an herbalish drink that
Kind of like tea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow,
Yep.
cool.
So one thing to do with that.
Nice.
Yeah. Thanks again for attending my Wild Edibles and Ephemerals program. If you have any questions about what you saw today or something else, you can definitely email me. Find my email on our website, eaglebluffmn.org. I am not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast, but I'll try and answer as much as I can. Thanks to Alex and Hannah, who were kind of behind the cameras today, asking some of those questions. And just a couple things to keep in mind while you are out and about. Know the rules, forage sustainably, and be careful with what you're picking. There's some sayings about mushrooms that are kind of words of wisdom to take with you. There are old mushroom hunters and there are bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old, bold mushroom hunters. So keep it safe, have fun, and eat the weeds.